There are moments when the heat of affliction burns so fiercely that even the strongest soul feels the tremble. Like iron in the blacksmith's fire, we are tested not for ruin, but for revealing. And oh, how the enemy trembles when a chosen soul begins to shine through the cracks of its breaking. You were not fashioned for the shallow comforts of conformity. No, you were called, carved, and commissioned for something far weightier. You were never meant to drift in the current. You were made to rise against it, and that calling, it bears a cost. The world loves its strong so long as they remain silent. It claps when you endure, but grows uneasy when your voice trembles. For they know in the marrow of their bones that when a soul marked by God finally breaks, it is not destruction, it is the awakening of thunder. Your fall does not echo like others. It sounds like prophecy. Your cry is not a whimper. It is a trumpet, and that sound cannot be ignored. They do not understand this divine paradox, that in the kingdom of God what shatters becomes sacred. That your pain does not simply spill, it pours out the power of heaven. They thought your silence meant surrender. They misread your patience as permission. But child of God, when the time comes, and your heart can no longer hold the weight, what breaks forth is not weakness, it is glory. Consider the lion. He does not roar to entertain. He roars to declare. And the storm it gathers not for show but for change. So it is with you. When you release the tears you've stored up in secret chambers of your soul, it is not mere emotion. It is a holy alarm. It is a shaking of foundations. And those who scoffed, who wounded, who walked away laughing, they will feel the shift before they understand it. Science will say tears are nature's reset. But we who walk by faith know better. When the heart of a chosen one breaks open, it is not nature resetting, it is heaven responding. What if your sorrow was not isolated? What if your pain has been echoing through unseen realms, disrupting principalities, and shaking the atmosphere? It may sound too bold to say, too grand, but tell that to the one who's walked through fire and come out blazing. Tell that to the woman who stayed silent through betrayal, only to rise with a voice that silences lies. Tell it to the man who bore the weight of ridicule, yet refused to bow, and now stands scarred, yes, but unshaken. So let them mock your tears. Let them think the crushing has claimed you. For they do not see what heaven sees, that your grief is turning to holy fire, and your silence is giving way to anointed thunder. And when the tide turns, and it will, they will not just regret wounding you. They will fear ever trying again. This is the hour they should have feared. The moment the oil of sorrow becomes the anointing of purpose. And you, the weary but unbroken, you are not forgotten. This message is heaven's whisper to your soul. Whether you've wandered long or just found your footing, hear this. Your endurance has not been wasted. Your breaking has not been in vain. For the word says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Psalm 30:5, and beloved, your morning is nearer than it seems. What's ahead is not simply healing, it's holy fire. You were born for this. Now rise. Let us begin. There are tears that heaven counts not because they fall from our eyes, but because of the fire they carry from the heart that held them in. These are not drops of sadness. They are the embers of battles fought in silence. They are the roar that never escaped the cry you buried, while the world demanded your strength. For too long you were the anchor when the winds howled, the light when no one else could see. And now, when your spirit begins to tremble, when the dam begins to crack, the ground itself quivers with the weight of your release. It's not just emotion, it's divine upheaval. The very air thickens as if creation itself holds its breath. Something sacred stirs in the silence before your soul erupts. And though those around you may not understand it, they feel it like a thundercloud just beyond the horizon, a holy unrest that cannot be explained. They shudder, not knowing why, a tremor in their conscience, a whisper in their spirit. And those who dismissed you, those who laughed at your quiet suffering, suddenly go still. Their words falter, their gaze drops. Because the grief of the chosen does not evaporate, it echoes. It crashes like waves against the shores of complacency. It doesn't disappear, it leaves a scar, and that scar tells a story. They never imagined your sorrow would rise like a lion. They didn't see that pain doesn't merely destroy, it remakes. The ashes they expected have become the clay in God's hands. And those who thought they had crushed you, they're now standing in the ruins of their own arrogance. Because when the chosen one breaks, something eternal shifts. A lie falls. A mask slips. A fortress trembles. And those who once strutted in false confidence find themselves naked before the truth they tried to bury. They should have remembered what fire does. It consumes, it purifies, and it spreads. They should have known that a storm once loosed does not return unchanged. But they didn't. They thought they had time. They believed they could mold you, contain you, silence you. And now they must reckon with what has awakened. For this is not simple grief. It is the earth itself responding to a soul heaven refuses to lose. It is the reckoning they never believed would come. So let them boast. Let them believe they've triumphed. Because when your silence finally shatters, when your pain is unchained, they will behold the mistake they made, and it will be too late to undo it. They feared not your strength, but the moment you discovered it wasn't your shield, it was your sword. All their tales, their expectations, their demands, painted you as unbreakable. Not to honor your courage, but to trap you within their control. They needed you to stay standing, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of what might be released if you ever crumbled. But now the cracks appear, and the world so confident in its illusions begins to doubt. When the mighty weep, when the faithful bend, when the unwavering tremble, then the foundations of pride and false power begin to quake. People stop in their tracks. They question what they once held as truth. Because if one so steadfast can be pierced, what of them? If the strong can bleed, what strength is truly theirs? This is the divine paradox. Your breaking was not your end, it was your revelation. For your strength was never in how tightly you clenched your fists, but in how much you bore while still walking forward. Every tear now shed is not a sign of weakness, but a trumpet call of change. A holy rupture in the fabric of what was announcing what must now come. You didn't endure because you were superhuman. You endured because God held you when no one else could. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Matthew 5:4. And that comfort, it is not a quiet hush. It is the voice of the Almighty thundering over your valley, declaring you are mine. The trembling of the righteous becomes the trembling of nations. And in that moment, the world does not see your collapse, it witnesses your transformation. When the burden grows too heavy and your knees finally buckle beneath its weight, don't think for a moment that you failed. Know, beloved, that sound you hear, the sob from deep within your chest, the tear that finally escapes your eye, is not weakness. It's the sound of your soul snapping its chains. It's the thunderclap of heaven saying, enough. For too long, you've been asked to be the rock, the one who never bends, never breaks, the one who carries everyone else's storm while hiding your own. But strength was never about being untouchable. It was about being faithful, even while wounded. They admired your silence, not because it comforted them, but because it let them pretend. Pretend you didn't feel. Pretend you didn't bleed. Pretend they were strong because you made it look easy. But when you finally cried, it unsettled them, not because it showed weakness, but because it revealed the truth. You were never unbreakable. You were unyielding. There's a difference. And when the unyielding finally trembles, it shakes more than itself. It shakes the world that rested too comfortably on your back. Let them be unsettled. Let them tremble. Your weeping is not your undoing, it's your awakening. And in that holy breaking, you are not falling apart. You are being reshaped by the hand of the Almighty. The world is not afraid of a strong soul. It is terrified of a soul that has tasted sorrow and chosen to rise anyway. For that kind of soul becomes unstoppable, not by pride, not by force, but by grace, forged in the fire of affliction. You see, tears in the hand of the chosen are not just water, they are flame. They are weapons tempered in the furnace of long suffering. The world saw you cry and thought it was over, but God saw it and said, now it begins. Others weep to forget. You weep to remember who you are, who He is, and what cannot stay the same. And while others dry their eyes and pretend it never happened, you let the pain speak. And it speaks loudly. It doesn't just echo at convicts. It rearranges. It speaks to the hidden cracks in every wall built to contain you. And slowly, subtly, like dawn pressing against the horizon, the shift begins. The atmosphere changes. People grow uneasy. Not because you are broken, but because your brokenness tells the truth. And truth, my friend, is dangerous to every lie. The proud begin to stumble under their own arrogance. Those who wore masks feel them slip. The house of cards begins to collapse, not from wrath, but from revelation. Because the chosen ones tear a single drop from the eye of the afflicted, carries with it more weight than 1,000 empty boasts. It unearths. It exposes. It reveals what was always there but covered in pretense. It speaks for the voiceless. It gives courage to the silent. It stirs rebellion not of violence but of righteousness. Your tears, they don't cleanse like rain. They carve like rivers through rock. They cut through deception. They slice through what is false until only the unshakable remains. And those who thought they were winning by breaking you, they were kindling dry and unaware, standing too close to holy fire. They didn't know the cost of pressing a soul to the edge of despair. They didn't expect the rising. They didn't understand that when sorrow touches the chosen, it awakens what should have never been buried. It raises the dead things. It shakes kingdoms. One tear. Just one. And the balance begins to tilt. The fortress begins to falter. Not because of rage, but because sorrow has eyes clearer than pride ever will. This is the terror of the righteous, not that they shout, but that they weep. Not that they fight, but that they feel. And in that feeling, something eternal is unleashed, something that does not return void. Because a chosen one's tears are not wasted, they are not hidden, they are not swallowed by the dust. They burn, they thunder, they redeem. There are moments in life when the heart can no longer contain the burden it has carried in silence. The world may not see it coming, but heaven does. And when that moment arrives, when the soul can no longer bear the weight of injustice, betrayal, and unspeakable sorrow, it doesn't whisper. It roars. They thought they could crush you easily, as if you were no more than dust beneath their feet. But what they forgot is that the ground they tread so lightly on can split without warning. A single fracture in the earth can unchain a fury that topples mountains and swallows pride. And when the heart of one chosen by God begins to weep, not with weakness, but with divine sorrow, it is not just grief. It is a spiritual quake, a holy upheaval. Those who mocked you in silence, who turned away while you suffered, who cast stones of betrayal with smiles on their lips, they never imagined what their cruelty would awaken. They thought your silence was surrender, but they failed to see the trembling of the heavens. They did not sense the slow, sacred rising of a storm born in the soul of the broken. Your emotions were never mere feelings. They were the gathering winds of a reckoning. They were pressure mounting behind the dam of endurance. And oh, when that dam bursts, it does not do so in secret. It breaks with a shout. It breaks with thunder in its chest and lightning in its tears. Sometimes it begins with something only the spirit can discern. A shift in the air. A stillness too deep to be natural. A quiet unease that settles on the skin like a warning. Then the heavens grow heavy as though God himself is preparing for what must come next. The sky darkens. The breath of the wind changes course. Nature itself leans in. And when the flood comes, when the pain finally spills over, even the earth listens. Thunder echoes like drums of war. Lightning tears the veil of night with rage. Rain pours not just to wet the ground, but to cleanse, to mourn, to awaken. And when no storm appears, the silence speaks even louder. A silence so thick, so hollow, that even the birds refuse to sing. It is the quiet that follows the breaking of something sacred. Because when the unbreakable breaks, the world learns the weight that sorrow can carry. Behind every tear is a history, betrayals, never spoken sacrifices, never acknowledged hopes buried beneath the rubble of shattered trust. And when those tears fall, they do not ask for permission. They bear witness to all that was endured. They should have stepped lightly. They should have known the ground they trampled was holy. They should have recognized that to push the beloved of God to the edge is not to win a battle, it is to summon judgment. For when a chosen one cries, they do not merely cry, they release. And what follows is not theirs to control. And now we come to the burden few will speak of, the burden of calling. They applaud you when you stand tall, when you shine with glory. They write your name in gold, not realizing that gold is forged in fire. But when you stumble, their applause grows faint. They vanish like mist when the morning sun rises. They marvel at your strength, but they never ask how many times you've collapsed in private. They call you light, but never wonder how long you've walked through the dark to find it. To be chosen by God is not always a crown, it is often a cross. It is not a reward. It is a responsibility hidden from view, but heavy on the soul. They look upon you and see an emblem, a hero, a vessel of something greater. But they do not see the fatigue behind your faith, the prayers whispered through clenched teeth, the quiet aching for someone, anyone to carry you, even for a moment. They see the fire in your eyes, but they don't feel the burns that got you there. And when you falter, they don't say, "How can I help?" They ask, "What's wrong with you?" as if your humanity is an inconvenience. When you pause to breathe, they call it weakness. When you fall, they do not rush to lift you. They stand back, hoping you'll rise because they cannot bear the thought that their symbol might bleed. You're not just a person to them, you're a role, a duty, a pillar that must not tremble. But you are human. You are weary. And even the strongest must sometimes weep. But hear this, God sees what man ignores. He knows the cost, He knows the nights, He knows the fire, and He walks beside you when the world walks away. There comes a cry from the soul of the chosen that no ear can truly grasp. It is not the sound of weakness, nor the echo of despair. It is something far more sacred, a holy trembling beneath the weight of a calling that never lets up. When the chosen weep, the heavens do not ignore it. No, those tears are not ordinary. They do not fall by chance. They are the language of a weary spirit that has stood too long in silence, carried too much without help, and pressed on when all seemed lost. These tears are not just sorrow. They are a cry of defiance against the lie that says you must always be composed, always be more than flesh and blood. There's a terrible myth whispered in the dark that strength means never breaking. But the truth, my friend, is that even the mightiest among us crave a moment of rest. Even the relentless long for release. And though the crowd may never see it, though no applause ever greets the suffering, the chosen one knows the burden is real, and it does not lighten. And yet, they keep going. Not because they are unshakable, but because the fire inside them refuses to die. That fire is their agony, their purpose, and their burden all at once. Number 6. Are these tears a curse, or are they sacred? Do they carry destruction, or do they carry deliverance? The world in its ignorance watches them cry and calls it beautiful, an emblem of mystery and meaning. Some say their tears are miracles in motion, rivers of healing, droplets of divine insight. But they don't see what lies beneath. Because for the chosen, those tears are heavy. They carry every disappointment buried, every sacrifice made in secret, every moment of standing alone when the world turned away. And make no mistake, their tears are not passive. They awaken the ground. They disturb the spirit realm. They rattle the unseen foundations. For most people, crying is an outlet. For the chosen, it is a battleground. Will this tear bring peace, or will it open the gates to something long kept sealed? Will it restore, or will it tear apart what remains? That is the dreadful question they live with. Each drop feels like judgment waiting to fall. One lapse, one misstep, and everything could come undone. Perhaps they've heard the legends, the holy warnings about those who came before, those whose anguish thundered across the skies, whose weeping turned the tides of nations. Perhaps they've felt the ancient fear that their pain, if ever unleashed, could summon forces not meant for this age. So they learn to restrain the storm within. They lock their emotions behind walls. They bite their tongues when they ought to wail. They keep walking when the ground beneath them is breaking, because the cost of losing control feels too great. But when that final thread snaps, when the seal is broken and the sorrow floods out like a tidal wave, the world will finally witness the truth that their grief is not quiet. It does not vanish. It reshapes. It remakes. It reveals. And therein lies the deepest tragedy. The very thing that might free them is also the thing that could burn everything they love to ash. That's the cross they bear. That's the price of being chosen. Number 7. Shackled by expectations, unleashed by defiance. They dressed your calling in golden words, built your cage with compliments. They never meant to honor you. They meant to use you. They named you strong so they wouldn't have to carry anything themselves. They forged chains and called them responsibility. They wrapped you in titles and forgot you were human. To them, you were never allowed to stumble, never permitted to bleed. You became their symbol of hope, and symbols must never show cracks. But here's what they never expected: that the image they worshipped would rebel, that the one they counted on to always endure might one day say, "Enough." They kept piling burdens, each heavier than the last, demanding your perfection, craving your self-sacrifice. Because deep down they feared what your breaking would mean for them. If you fall, what becomes of the illusion they clung to? So they denied your sorrow, ignored your cries. They convinced themselves that because you could carry the weight you should, but they missed the truth. The chosen do not cry to gain pity. Their tears are not weakness. They are a protest against injustice, against being dehumanized. When those tears finally come, it is not surrender. It is a revolution. It is heaven's trumpet sounding in defiance of false thrones and cruel expectations. It is the sacred fury of one who refuses to be imprisoned by a world that never understood them. Because chains were never meant to last. They were meant to break. When the tears finally fall, the ones you hid in the silence, the ones you buried beneath the weight of everyone's expectations, they do not fall in defeat. They rise like incense from a wounded altar, and heaven does not turn away. No, beloved, the Lord draws nearer still. For these tears are not born of weakness. They are the voice of a soul long misunderstood, crying out from the furnace of affliction. You were never meant to be invincible. And now, when the strength they borrowed from your silence begins to fade, the illusion they clung to begins to tremble. They leaned on your resolve, but never stopped to count the cost. They were comforted by your composure, blind to the crucifixion hidden behind your composure. They applauded the warrior, but never asked about the wounds. Yet when the chosen one weeps, it is not a collapse, it is a divine confrontation. The mask of perfection shatters not just for you, but for them. Suddenly, they can no longer pretend. No longer hide behind your strength. No longer silence their own trembling by pointing to your unwavering stance. For in your breaking, something sacred is revealed, the truth that even God's vessels bleed and still remain chosen. This is not the end of your strength. It is its rebirth. You are not losing control, you are reclaiming it. And the tears that fall from your face are not fragile drops. They are thunder in a still room. Let them see. Let them squirm in the tension they cannot explain. For your grief speaks of fire that does not consume, but purifies. Of a God who does not throw away the broken, but shapes his glory in the cracks. They built you like a monument, tall, cold, unreachable. But the moment the surface cracks, it is not you who shatters. It is the lie. The lie that strength must always wear a smile. The lie that holy endurance never limps. The lie that being called by God means you never fall to your knees and cry out, "Lord, I can't carry this anymore." They didn't want a person. They wanted an anchor for their own fears. As long as you stood tall, they didn't have to examine their own trembling. As long as you never faltered, they could pretend the storm wasn't real. But the moment your voice quivers, the moment your knees buckle under the weight, they panic. Not because they feel your pain, but because it disrupts the myth they built around you. That's the tragedy and the truth. They never saw your heart. They admired the image. They needed you to be unbreakable because they were too afraid to admit they already were. And when the image falls, they call it betrayal, not because you failed them, but because your humanity reminded them of their own. But God never asked you to carry their expectations. He never demanded you pretend. The same Jesus who wept at Lazarus's tomb, who groaned in Gethsemane, who bled on Calvary, is not offended by your breaking. He sanctifies it. Your pain is not a scandal, it is a sermon. Your tears are not shame, they are sacred testimony. And when the ones who cheered your strength recoil at your sorrow, know this: The Lord is still with you in the silence they cannot bear. Let the tears fall. Let them expose what was never real. Let the sobs echo in the places where false praise once rang. For in that sacred unraveling, the Spirit speaks not in thunder, but in the stillness. And the fire that remains will not be the fire of fame or admiration. It will be the fire of God burning away every illusion until only the truth remains. You were never chosen because you were unbreakable. You were chosen because even when broken, you never let go of Him. There comes a moment, beloved, when the veil is torn not by our triumphs, but by our tears. When heaven permits a soul to weep, it is not disgrace that falls, it is truth that rises. And now they are forced to watch, not as spectators of glory, but as witnesses to the unraveling of a lie. The lie that you were made to carry more than your portion. The lie that your silence made them righteous. The lie that your endurance gave them permission to be cowards. They must watch now as the burden they heaped upon your back begins to press upon their own conscience. They see the tremble in your spirit, the cracks in your strength, and suddenly the mask they wore shatters. They wanted your strength not because they cherished you, but because it gave them shelter from facing their own shadows. As long as you remained unbroken, they didn't have to confront the storms inside themselves. You were their borrowed courage. But now, when your armor breaks, when your shoulders finally fall, it isn't just your humanity that's revealed. It is their denial that is exposed. And oh, what holy power resides in a single tear when it falls from the eyes of the burdened. It is no ordinary grief. It is the voice of heaven peeling back the illusion, for they did not love the soul that wept in secret. No, they loved the symbol, the idol they crafted in their minds, an image of strength so flawless it excused their own spiritual apathy. But when that image crumbles, when the person emerges from behind the myth, they feel not compassion, but confusion. Not sorrow, but fear. Because if even you could stumble, what hope is left for them, you see? It's easy to follow someone who never bleeds. It costs them nothing to praise a figure who never falls. But when pain becomes visible, when the cup finally runs over, they recoil. They whisper among themselves, wondering if they had ever truly known you. But they did not recoil because of your pain. No, they recoiled because the comfort of the story they told themselves began to unravel. A story where someone else bore the weight, someone else stood tall, someone else never asked for anything in return. That's the great deception, isn't it? They called you brave only when it cost them nothing. They honored you only when you asked for no help. But the moment your knees buckled, they chose silence. When your hands trembled, they turned their backs. They had admired the fortress, not the faith that built it. They stood by your victories but fled from your valley. And yet they never once asked what it cost to keep standing. Let them watch. Let them witness not your collapse, but their own illusions burning to ash. Let them see that the pain you carried was never a sign of defeat, but a sacred offering, a reckoning, not a retreat. Because when someone chosen by God breaks in the open, it does something holy. It forces the world to face the truth, that they never carried what you carried, that they never gave what you gave, that they never bled for what you bled for. Let them watch as the truth crushes their excuses. Let them feel the weight they once ignored. And in the silence that follows, may the Spirit whisper, "You were never alone." And now the image they worshipped begins to fall not into disgrace, but into resurrection. What they once called divine becomes human before their eyes. They thought you were made of stone. But when you bleed, child of God, it is not a failure, it is a trumpet. It is not a wound, it is a war cry from heaven. They raised you up to be untouchable, didn't they? Built you like a monument? Not because they wanted to share your burden, but because they wanted a symbol that would never collapse. They cheered as long as you stayed silent. But when your voice trembled, when your body broke under the unseen weight, suddenly they were silent. Suddenly, they didn't know how to love you anymore. And that was their second mistake. Because what they witnessed wasn't your fall, it was your rising. Not as the flawless idol they wanted, but as the living, breathing evidence of a Savior who wept. A Savior who bled. A Savior who stood alone so we could stand in grace. And when they finally see that, perhaps they'll understand what strength really means. When the tears of the chosen fall, heaven leans in. Not because those tears are signs of surrender, but because they are echoes of a holy fire burning through the soul. The world often places its champions on lofty pedestals, not to honor them, but to excuse itself from the weight of compassion. If they can convince themselves you are beyond feeling, beyond breaking, they don't have to ask if you're weary. They don't have to wonder if the cross on your back has splintered into your skin. They can rest easy, pretending you are made of iron, not flesh. But there comes a sacred moment when the illusion shatters, when the strong tremble, when the tear falls, and the ground itself seems to quake. For that tear is not a sign of collapse, it is the thunderous declaration that you are real, that you have walked through fire not unscathed, but still burning with purpose. You have bled quietly in the night, wrestled with heaven in your solitude, and carried burdens no tongue could name. You've cried in secret places where only God could see, and still you rise. That's the part they never expected. Not the breaking, but the rising. They thought strength was silence, but now they see it for what it truly is, resurrection. To feel every betrayal, every insult, every lonely ache, and still choose to press forward. That is power not born of pride, but of purpose. The kind of power that makes angels weep and demons flee. The kind that doesn't wear armor but bears scars. That doesn't demand applause, but bleeds in prayer. And now they are afraid, not because you've changed, but because you've revealed the truth. You were never a statue carved from stone. You are the storm that walks in grace. You are the soul that shattered and still sang. You are a mirror reflecting every unspoken sorrow they tried to bury. And in that reflection they are undone. They will try to make sense of it. They will search your eyes for the invincibility they once projected. But now they see tears. Holy tears. Not weakness, but a fountain from a deeper well. Not defeat, but the beginning of a reckoning. And some of them, yes, even the ones who mocked you, will feel their hearts stir. Something ancient and sacred will awaken in them. Because pain like yours cannot be ignored. It confronts, it convicts, it converts. Even your enemies will hesitate. Those who once built walls of pride will suddenly feel them crack. The grudges that burned hot will feel cold. The names they called you will lose their sting, because your pain has become a sermon, not preached with words, but with wounds. And those wounds speak louder than any argument. What they never counted on was that your breaking would be the birth of a movement, that your lament would ignite a rebellion not of rage, but of redemption, that when the unbreakable finally breaks, the chains on others begin to fall, because suddenly the lines drawn in the sand blur, and the hearts behind the armor beat a little louder. Even the hardest hearts sense it. This is sacred ground. So let them see you weep. Let them feel the tremor in their bones. For your sorrow is not just your own. It is the sound of heaven roaring through cracked voices and tear-streaked faces. And in that holy sorrow, revival begins. You are not their idea of perfection. You are God's vessel of truth. And in the end, the world doesn't need more idols. It needs fire, it needs testimony, it needs you wounded weeping rising. Because once they see the tear of the chosen, they will never look at power the same way again. There is a power so fearsome, so divine, that when it begins to stir, entire kingdoms tremble. It does not shout. It does not parade. It whispers in the soul of one who has suffered and been silenced, and in that whisper, mountains begin to move. When the right soul begins to feel the deep ache of injustice, when the eyes of the weary open to the falsehoods that held them captive, the very earth beneath the feet of tyrants begins to quake. The enemy believed they had you bound. They assumed your pain would hush your voice forever, but they misjudged the holy purpose of your sorrow. You see, God never wastes the agony of His chosen. The trials meant to destroy you have become the womb of your rebirth. The stone they rolled across your grave was not the end, it was the soil that covered a seed. And seeds, though buried, are not dead. The tears of the elect are not the closing chapter, they are the sacred waters of a new beginning. When the world celebrates your defeat, heaven begins to prepare your return. And when the faithful rise again, they rise with fire in their bones, and a message the world can no longer ignore. Pain does not decay the faithful. It refines them. The fire does not consume, it purifies. Every blow you received stripped away another layer of illusion of comfort, of childish belief in the world's justice. And in its place, something fierce was born. The cries you offered in the dark were not weakness. They were the labor pains of a soul being reborn in truth. Every tear that fell was heaven chiseling away at the old self, carving out a vessel fit for divine power. There comes a time when gentleness is mistaken for weakness, when hope feels like a snare, when love seems like a door left open for betrayal. And in that time, the Spirit begins to work in deeper places. No longer content with survival, the soul begins to hunger for transformation. You were not simply meant to endure, dear one. You were meant to be remade, not in the image of the world, but in the image of the one who bore the cross and conquered the grave. Your suffering has forged a mystery within you. The world may see your posture has changed. Your silence now carries weight. Your eyes burn with something unspoken, but they will never understand the price. They were not there when you cried out with no answer. They did not feel the crushing weight of betrayal, the loneliness of being misunderstood, the ache of bearing burdens that weren't yours to carry. Only you and the Lord know what it cost to rise again. They thought your tears would make you small, but God used them to anoint you. They believed they had broken you, but heaven was building you. For the chosen are not shattered. They are shed of every lie, every false comfort, every chain. What remains is not soft or safe. It is holy. It is fierce. It is the voice crying in the wilderness, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord." So let the enemy mock. Let them sing their songs of victory. They do not know what they have awakened. The most dangerous soul is the one who has surrendered all, the one who no longer fears loss because they have already died and risen in Christ. The fire they lit under you was the very altar God used to sanctify you. And now, like a storm on the horizon, you are no longer a whisper. You are the trumpet of reckoning. When the chosen rise from the ashes, they do not return as they were. They return with eyes that see, with hearts that burn, with voices that thunder. And those who once stood tall in opposition will find their knees growing weak. This is not merely the next chapter. This is the divine turning of the page. What they meant for evil, God has turned for glory. If you've felt this burning in your soul, if you've walked through fire and emerged clothed in something eternal, then you know the storm is not coming. It's already here. And you, child of the Most High, are its herald. Thank you for walking with me through this sacred moment. If something stirred in you today, if the fire of your own story flickered back to life, if your tears felt seen, if your pain found a voice, then know this: you are not alone and you are not finished. What tried to bury you may have just awakened your purpose. God is not done writing your story. So if today spoke to your spirit, I invite you to subscribe, not just to this channel, but to the journey of becoming all that heaven whispered over you when no one else believed. Hit that like button if this message gave your soul a little more breath. Share it with someone who needs to know their ashes still carry seeds of glory. And come back here every week. We'll keep building a space for the broken and the brave, for those rising from the wreckage with holy fire in their bones. Until next time, keep walking, keep weeping, keep becoming, because the world hasn't seen the full strength of what God is doing in you yet. And oh, when it does, it won't know what hit it.